Andrew, thanks again for joining us for another question from church planters to you to basically draw on your experience. And the one we've got now is from a church planter on the South Coast, and he's talking about team management. So he asks, how do you manage multiplying quickly without becoming staff-centric and thereby restricting your ability to reach a whole region? He's getting at the fact that there's a tension between growing a church and growing a team, and maybe growing a team can take away from what the church might expect to be. So how do you handle that balance? What's your wisdom there?
Well, how about I bounce some thoughts around and
Okay.
you help me understand what I'm saying. Um, when you're planning a church, so talking planning church, you're in the kind of 50, 40, 30 stage of people. It seems to me there's two big, put simply, there's two big priorities mission-wise. You want to get profile and you want to get personal work.
Mm.
So the two ways this small community of people is going to connect to the community is through umbrella profile and through the individuals doing connecting. So that's how you grow your church, by connecting people. So the personal work is, the 30, 40 people I've got, they will have friends. They'll know people. They can get to know people. Stirring them and helping them be on task with that, in engaging with their friends and so on, is one dimension. But the other dimension, of course, is that there's a whole region way beyond the 30 or 40 people that your friends will know, that you're not connected with. So that's the profile. What can I then invest in to create such a noise about this new church, this new community, this new belief that we're bringing of Jesus, that, as I mentioned in the seminar recently, the warm contact, the person who has had some touch with Christian things or some disturbance in their life where they're wondering and puzzling, how do they get connected to me where my friend networks won't get them? So the two things, profile and personal work. And you've got to work both those. And as a resource limited leader who is stretched for time, I've got to analyse where the biggest returns are with time input. So have I got a group of 30 or 40 people who have got good networks, who are working their processes well, so that by that means we're getting good steady contact, which is filling up our time? Well, if that's the case, you may put a little bit less on the profile side of things. But if you've got a group of people in say a socially disadvantaged area where they're not good relationally, they haven't got great French skills, they're way back on the mission mind, you might need to invest more time in the profile side of things to get a broader reach for this community. So you've got to balance your limited time. So they're the two big areas I'd be working on initially. Now, behind all of that is the once I'm connecting people, how am I drawing them in to understand the gospel? How am I connecting them into the community? How am I deepening them if they come to faith and following them up? There's all the processes that happen after that where attention is needed. But keeping those two things distinct, I think, is important.
Okay. But when you do that, I guess you're making a decision too about your team, aren't you? Because if you decide that you're going to be concentrating more on the umbrella, then I take it that's something you want to handle maybe a little more centrally than, say, just getting everybody to generate as much sort of regional noise as possible. So is that where you would start saying, okay, we need to do more umbrella-style interactions, so I need to hire somebody? Is that going to affect the way you build your team?
Oh, in terms of hiring, okay. If I might share something we've discussed before, I would never hire someone uh, where I could expect a volunteer to do the work. It's a good line, isn't it, mate? As we've talked about before. Yeah, no, at the stage of 40 or 50 people, you're not anywhere near a position to think about hiring. So you have to work with volunteers and manage the limited resource you've got there. And yeah, you're a long way from thinking employment. So developing my ability as a leader to delegate and draw people in, find gifts and abilities, mobilise them, free them, release them. That's a major task of a leader. In fact, I would go so far as to say never employ a person who hasn't got that skill, because they'll just be an additional person, an adder, they won't be a multiplier. Whereas we can't in the Christian community afford to employ adders, we have to employ multipliers. So, no, I'm, as a church planter, needing to be the multiplier. So I need to be the person who can find the team of 10 people out of the 40 who can engage on the profile activities. Now, having done that, you won't absorb someone's time entirely. I don't think it should ever be a choice between a volunteer who does the centralised profile work, let's say, or does personal mission work. No one's that busy. And it's helping people actually recognise what they're already doing and how they can be more intentional with what they're already doing. If I'm driving to work already, find at work someone that I can get a lift with. If I like sport, don't watch it on my own. So kind of, you don't have to add more to your life. You just have to find ways to use what's in my life to do the things that I now need to do. And in terms of a leader, there's lots of things I'm already doing that I don't have to add on to do better with. I just have to be more intentional with what I do. So preaching, for instance, preaching. What other organisation has a structure where the leader of the organisation gets 40 minutes every week with the team to envisage, compel, empower, stir? Do you know what other organisation has that built into their whole life DNA structure? So the sermon is an opportunity to unpack the scriptures in such a way that people see what we're being called to as missionaries, evangelists, loving friends. And so work the things you've got much more, as well as add the other pieces in.
And this is what helps the members then be on mission themselves. So they're not actually watching so much as looking for that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So that now there's where you need to do some analysis in the early stages, 30, 40, 50, 60 people. As a leader, I'm kind of, are these 40, 50 people going to take so much investment discipleship-wise for them to become effective evangelists themselves or inviters? Not everyone will become the share of the whole gospel with their friend. Not everyone becomes that, but they might at the very least become an inviter, someone who can invite someone to things. Are we so far back with this core group that it's going to take me years to get them up to speed? Well, if that's the case, then I might invest my time in some other places to work around that slow dimension I've got.
Now, hang on. I'm not going to let you get away with something so general. So if you found yourself a core group and you're struggling, you're realising they're going to take a lot of time, where are you practically going to be able to find people who are going to give you the mission core that you need? I mean, there's plenty of people who've started churches and have found that they have lots of one thing and not enough of the other. So how do you bring in more people into that core? Do you start a second group? I mean, what do you do?
Again, it's, there's no one size fits all. If I was in if I'm in a major city in Australia, and I've got 20, 30 people who are way back in their spiritual maturity, I might cast around for, 2 or 3 people who I could envisage to join this mission team who have got leadership skills and abilities. I might cast around to do that. But there'll be some occasions when you parachute into a context where you just can't, they just don't exist. You think about Richard Johnson, who lands with the First Fleet. He hasn't got much option to cast around anywhere. And there are contexts where that's very similar today. And so what I would do rather is I would use my gifts as an evangelist, which is what we want church planters and need them to be. I would use my gifts a little bit more front and centre and say, find ways to maximise the skills and gifts of the people where they are at and mine and wed them together. So, for instance, uh, one thing that is is a possible sell is the dialogue evangelism thing. So I get 4 or 5 people and I say, in 2 months' time on a Tuesday night, I'm going to host a dinner with my wife, with you guys and your 4 friends, your 10 friends, and it'll be a direct, specific, let's talk about spirituality and life after death, and have a fun night together talking big issues. So I would get them where they're at and get them to be able to do what they can do. They may not be the run things themselves, drive, but I'd marry our giftings together and try and work that process. So it's being aware of a number of options I can use given who I've got and the skills and so on. But I'm always thinking, what's the way to maximise, not just... So another little bounce thought, as a leader in that context very early on, I want to invest my limited time in things that have the biggest impact, so I won't become the coach of the local soccer team for the sake of mission. I won't become that unless I'm in a context that's very, very far back, because those 3-4 hours, 6 hours a week that are invested in that are non-specific mission activity that will bring very little return over a long time. And so it's far better for me to mobilise half a dozen other people to be doing those kind of things than me do it. So I use my 6 hours for that.
No, mate, it makes sense. I'm just thinking, it sounds like, well, from my background, which is a media thing, really understanding your audience, before knowing what you're going to put in front of them and how you're actually going to enable them to be mission-minded. And so I figure that you've been really helpful in helping us unpack that idea of understanding gifts before you marry them with your own to make the greatest effect. Would you say?
Yeah. Well, you've got 2 audiences at that level, haven't you? You've got the immediate Christian community that is your team, and it's me as the leader marrying their gifts and abilities to make this team do far more together than we could all on our own. And it's me then, together with that team perhaps, being aware of the audience more broadly that I'm trying to reach, and what's the best way to begin to mobilise and catch them. All the time, though, I'm trying to find. I don't want to do a lot of time in cold contact work if there's warm contacts around. I think that's the mistake. We try and reach the people furthest away from us and the gospel, and it takes an inordinate amount of time, and we're in it for years, whereas the bloke next door goes, no, I'm going to go for the easy warm contacts. Yeah. I'm going to go for the people closest to me, build a bigger team which can reach further. Just thinking strategically and empowering your work to mobilise it. In terms of staffing then, you really, it's sometime down the track before you're in a position to either elevate one of those persons that you've got taking on significant leadership in church and freeing them up a little more, or bringing someone in from outside. But that's, the church, in Australian church planning, that's, you're talking, you've hit the 100 mark by now before that's happening. Unless you've got an MTS worker and some Geneva funding through sponsorships and support, you might have an MTS worker with you as well.
Andrew, thanks heaps. For thoughts that you're just bouncing around, you've given us heaps to think about. We'll basically be taking more questions from church planners. So if you have a question that you'd like to share with Andrew and get his wisdom on just these bounces, which are well worth it, you'll see an email address will come up on the screen in a moment. Andrew, thanks very much for your time. I look forward to seeing you next time around.
Good on you. Thanks, mate.